Greetings from San Clemente, California. Mike Moffitt here, professor for New England College's online communications ethics course, CO2310. I'm actually flying back to New Hampshire to the home of New England College on Wednesday in a couple of days. But through the wonders of modern technology, I'm very pleased to be involved with this course and to connect with some great folks, sounds like, from Ohio, North Carolina, Florida, New York, and beyond. The focus of this first podcast is on news reporting, which represents part one of our textbook, chapters 1 through 5. And I've already read and commented on some excellent perspectives, some material you've all written so far, on how the different networks might respond to the same news event. Most particularly Al Jazeera, NPR, Fox are the three that we've cited, and others have come up as well. So it's a matter of perspective, and the same event can look differently to different people depending upon how they look at it, where they stand, where they're at. Think about an instant replay during an NFL game. Okay, it's the same event, the same play, but different cameras have different perspectives on the play. A lot of times, if it's not clear what exactly happened, they go to the booth and instant replay, and they have different cameras. They review different camera angles, and the play looks differently from different angles. Now, it's the same play. It is what it is, and whatever happened, but it does look differently depending upon where you stand, or what angle you look at the play from, or for our purposes, the news event. Now, moving on to Chapter 2 brings us to the question of whether the Unabomber's manifesto should have been published by the Washington Post or the New York Times. And the editors at both those places had to overcome the perception or the issue that they were being told what to do by a terrorist. What dangerous precedent might that set? And as it turns out, publishing the manifesto is actually what brought the Unabomber to justice. They were able to read his lengthy tract, and some people recognized his prose, and eventually they identified who he was, tracked him down, and arrested him. This is like around 22 years ago. But in terms of journalistic or communications ethics, editors must deal with pressures of all sorts. An advertiser, for example, if a major advertiser wants it to be known that they'd like a certain event covered, did they get a little extra consideration? If they are paying millions of dollars in advertising in the real world, is it a sellout then for an editor or a news director to send a reporter to do a story on an otherwise uneventful grand opening or open house being done by a major advertiser? Again, it's a potentially unethical consideration. Now, supposedly there's a wall between advertising and editorial at newspapers. I know a couple of you are looking into getting into careers in journalism, and these are important things to ponder. Do you consider it to be an unethical violation to do a special story about that company or business that spends all that advertising money? There's gray areas. Somebody who's on the verge of selling or bringing in an advertising account, all they need to close the deal is to have the newspaper or the TV station do a little extra special story on that business, and then they'll be $1 million advertiser to that news media outlet. Pressure from advertising on editorial, it's the real world. I just read a column about the relatively new museum in Philadelphia in the American Revolution, and the columnist noted that the Oneida Indians had a fairly unexpectedly large exhibit, at the museum, and it turns out that the Oneida Indians, upstate New York, I believe, Iroquois Nation, the Oneidas had a casino, and they donated a lot of money to the museum to support the museum of the American Revolution, and subsequently the Oneida Indians had a section of that museum, an exhibit about their role in the Revolution, which maybe was not as big as some other Native American tribes or factions or whatever, but they gave a lot of money to the museum, and so they ended up with a fairly significant exhibit. So my question to you is a museum a communications outlet? And and if so, did they compromise their integrity maybe a little bit or not by accepting this casino money from the Oneida tribe and then giving them a bigger exhibit? Um, there's a guy named Alan Barth who said that news is the first rough draft of history. So museums are about history, really. Newspapers about news, but news is the first rough draft of history. Interesting. So who knew? I mean, my point here is that communications ethics issues are everywhere, not just newspapers and television stations, but also blogs, museums, social media, things that we're going to get into. Along similar lines is the issue of publishing those cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad. This Danish newspaper or magazine published some cartoons, very controversial, offensive cartoons, particularly to Muslims, to many Muslims. So should they have done that? There was a lot of violence and injury that came about because of subsequent, riots and violence related to this magazine publishing these offensive cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad. Now this became a news story because Danish interests were attacked in other parts of the world as well. So now it's a news issue. So in America, somebody reporting on the violence in Denmark and elsewhere over the publication of these cartoons raises a question. Well, what were the cartoons? Fair question. And so, should the cartoons be published in America at the risk of inciting more offense or insult or controversy to Muslims and others who might not want to see these offensive cartoons published? So what do you do if you're an editor? Are you censoring part of the news by not showing the cartoons, or are you using good judgment and avoiding a riot or violence? Interesting. So news outlets that refuse to publish the cartoons or the caricatures of Muhammad, were they refusing to publish them out of respect for the sensitivities of certain religious people, or out of fear, or both? Okay, chapter 3. Among the chapter 3 subjects is WikiLeaks. That website has been notorious for publishing classified secret material. That's their mission. That's what they do. And they've been certainly in the news over the last year because somehow people at WikiLeaks, however they did it, not clear yet. I don't think, at least not to me or to many people, how they accessed these emails of John Podesta and others from the Democrat National Committee, but they published them, and it appears that the emails were authentic. Nobody's claimed that they were not authentic or that they were doctored, and I've seen no claims to the contrary. So this was seemingly a gross invasion of their privacy to have their personal, private correspondence, electronic email correspondence accessed and then shared with the world. So was there any value to this? I mean, this reminds me of the Pentagon Papers in 1971, where Daniel Ellsberg had got some secret material on the Vietnam War and how the Vietnam War came about. Secret material, gave it to the New York Times and then the Washington Post, and they published it, and it made some people some presidents and secretaries of state and many people in the 1960s look bad in how they pushed America into the Vietnam War. So Pentagon Papers, WikiLeaks, the Democrat emails. Did the WikiLeaks people violate any ethical standards by publishing the personal information? By the same token, did the New York Times put America at risk by publishing some secret classified material? Things to think about. Now, were those emails that WikiLeaks published, say they'd been made available to Fox or NPR or Al Jazeera or MSNBC? Again, this is a rhetorical question. You don't necessarily have to answer it directly to me, but were these emails who have gone not to WikiLeaks but to one of those other news outlets I just mentioned, how would they have handled it? Would NPR have gone right out and shared those emails with Fox? Personally, I think Fox, I think would have been more, or would have been less reluctant to push that out there than maybe NPR. Speculation. Point is that different media outlets would likely have handled these things differently. Okay, moving along. If you, again, rhetorical question, if you were with a domestic news media outlet, be it radio, television, uh, newspaper, or your own personal blog, and you came across some newsworthy material, uh, what do you do? I mean, how would you handle it? I mean, if you're a journalist or reporter, and your mission is to report, uh, what do you do with this material? Things to think about as we move forward. Okay, they're not necessarily right or wrong answers to these questions, although there are standards and guidelines that kind of in the Potter box we're going to get into that'll give us a structure for looking at these scenarios and these situations and coming to a determination as to the best course of action to take. Not that everybody would take precisely the same course of action when confronted with an issue of media ethics or communication ethics, where decisions need to be made. But the ethical dilemmas that we're going to deal with do call for us to look at precedents, what's been done in the past, best practices, philosophy, your own standards, your own philosophy, your own morals, or if you will. And also don't forget there are laws. There's laws that cover some of the stuff that factor into the equation as well. Okay, Chapter 4. What are the issues in Chapter 4? Involves the 1999 Women's World Cup soccer final. I remember watching it. As I've written, as you know, I'm a sports guy. That was 18 years ago. I'm not sure if any of you were around to watch that. USA-China World Cup final. Overtime, penalty kicks, 0-0. Finally, Brandy Chastain makes the decisive penalty kick, and immediately, and this is something soccer players often do, they pull their shirts off. Now, this is women's soccer, and she pulled her shirt off immediately, and this became a sensation. Talking about it today, it's in her book. Had a man done that, it would not have been an issue. Of course, men and women are not identical, and so was there a double standard with all the focus on Brandy Chastain's gesture in her body, or in a way that would not have been for men? I mean, this is part of one of the case studies in Chapter 4. But if you had a sports blog, how much attention, if any, would you have given to that particular shirt caper? Again, that's just a rhetorical question for now, but something to ponder and think about as we move forward and look at some of these case studies. What would you do, and why, or why not? How would you handle some of these ethical conundrums in terms of communications? Again, whether it be emails, blogs, social media, writing a story for a newspaper, doing a column. Now, a story is different from a column. I'm a columnist, which means I can give my opinion. I've also been a reporter, which involves different expectations and standards, or TV, or here I'm communicating to you in a video mode. Are there any ethical aspects to what I'm doing here And there are. I mean, I mentioned some of the states where some of you are from. Um, you know, we're right to have some personal information. Of course, everything basically that you've written is not necessarily public information, but it's class information. But you know, as we have back and forth with this class, I don't anticipate any issues particularly, but still, um, there are ethical issues that could come up in a class like this, an online class where a lot of the communication is, or it's all the communication is electronic. All right, finally, we come to chapter 5, the last chapter in part 1, which deals with privacy. Now, presumably, you all have some social media experience. Maybe you're all on Facebook. I know Jessica is. She had written that. I am, and I'm going to guess most, maybe all of you are. So I have 1,100 or so friends on Facebook, many of whom I've never met personally. They're friends of friends or people that know people that want to be my friend, or in some cases I've asked them to be my friend for professional reasons or political reasons or advertising reasons or whatever. So have any of those 1,100 friends has the license to just post anything on my Facebook account. And I've left all the permissions wide open. Occasionally I've had some stuff posted that I've left up for a short period of time and taken it off because it's kind of not what I really want to have on my Facebook account. But anyway, of those 1,100 people, they all have great license, and a couple of them I have taken down. But I've defriended one person since I have been on Facebook. But I also have I'm an elected state representative. I also have a separate account for the state representative situation. So anyway, chapter 5, the issue of the Montana girl who became a prostitute in Washington, D.C. before being murdered. Now, it's a heartbreaking story for me to consider, and it raises questions that maybe the New York Times would not have to deal with. We're talking about a hometown newspaper in Montana. So how does a small town local paper balance the pain that it causes locally to a local family against the need to report the details of the murder of a member of a local family? How do you do that? And not every editor would do it the same way, but I think experience shows there are some ways that are maybe better than others to deal with a situation like the Montana situation. So how relevant is all this to you, knowing that most students are not going to become news editors or directors, although a couple of you may? Again, social media, though, is almost universal and presumably impacts you all directly. So have you ever made any posts that you'd like to pull back in retrospect? I probably have. If you have a Facebook page, you're kind of an editor of sorts. Okay, what do you put out there? How do you edit it? Do you put videos, you put links, you put photos? You're all editors if you're on Facebook, and there are communications ethics aspects to that, and professional aspects as well. So as a practical matter, for our purposes and for the promotional project due the last week of class, try to ponder what role reporting might play in your promotion plan. Now, again, the promotion plan, it's not a marketing plan. A marketing plan can be an instinct. Your final project is what I call a promotional plan. And presumably you've all read this already. Pick a business, a company, an enterprise that you've worked with in the past. I know you've all had jobs here or there, several jobs. I have. Of course, I've been around for a long time. But to personalize this, pick a company or an enterprise or an endeavor or a business that you've worked for so that you can personally relate to that business and have some direct insights into how they do business. And at the end of the course, 6 weeks away, work up a 3 to 5 page, fairly brief paper, not a promotional plan, not a marketing plan, but we'll call it a promotional project, utilizing a lot, hopefully, of the material and insights and experiences that you get from each part of the course into a promotional plan that ethically communicates in a fashion, markets, promotes, communicates in an ethical fashion to put that business that you know a little bit about into a better place. So from part one, um, you know, think about some of these things as we move forward. Would your promotional plan involve social media, LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube? Uh, would you do a news release? Would you do a special event, a grand opening, or a celebrity uh, appearance? I mentioned YouTube, photo ops. Uh, you know, do you have a budget notionally? You can theoretically claim as you put your paper together that you have a budget if you want to say, as part of my promotion plan, I've acquired a budget from wherever of $10,000, of which I want to use $5,000 for a radio campaign locally, or whatever, or not. Okay, all kinds of ways you can put this together. So things to think about before we move on to part two. As we move on from news reporting, chapters 1 through 5, part 1, we'll move to the exciting world of advertising, okay, and the many potential ethical issues involved with advertising. So from news reporting to part 2, advertising, and more, better, later. Have a great week.